The lineups are now out between Australia versus Samoa in the Pacific Championships. Let's take a look at the starting squad and then I'll be giving you my tips and predictions. Starting with Australia in the backs, they have James Tedesco, Dylan Edwards, Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, Katoni Staggs, Selwyn Cobbo, Cameron Munster and Daly Cherry-Evans. In the forwards, they've gone with Payne Haas, Ben Hunt, Tino Fa'asuamaleaui, Cameron Murray, Liam Martin and Isaiah Yeo. On the bench is Harry Grant, Lindsay Collins, Patrick Carrigan and Ruben Cotter. And in the reserves is Nico Hines, Jake Trbojevic, Thomas Flegler and Valentine Holmes. Taking a look at the Samoa squad in the backs, they have Sualavi Faialogo, Mori Taulangi, Izack Tago, Young Tanamaipea, Brian To'o, Stephen Crichton and Dejan Assi. In the forwards, they have Stefano Utokamanu, Gordon Chan-Kum-Tong, Junior Paulo, Luciano Leilua, Connolly Lemuelu and Keenan Palasia. On the bench is Spencer Leniu, Terrell May, Helam Luki and Ronald Volkman. And on the reserves is Royce Hunt, Justin Matamua, Greg Marju and Tommy Tallow. So if you're part of the Samoa coaching staff, you're taking a look at this Australia team and wondering, where's the weakness? What can we possibly exploit in this Australia team? How can we find holes to pull out a win here? And I think there is one, and it's Dylan Edwards. So you're probably wondering, how is Dylan Edwards a weakness or a liability? And it does feel weird to say that Dylan Edwards is a weakness, but if you look at it logically, if you look at the rest of the team, everyone's in a normal position that they regularly play. Dylan Edwards is out of position. I don't know if he's played on the wing previously in his career. That's on me and my lack of knowledge. But for the past few years, he's been a regular fullback. And I would personally say that the transition from wing to fullback is a lot easier than fullback to wing. That's just my guess. But if I was to pinpoint why this would be a weakness, two main reasons being, one, the aerial threat, and two, expansive plays. In terms of the aerial threat, typically when you're a fullback and you've played there your entire career, you have an idea of how everything should look. You know how to scan the field. Everything is just regular to you. It's muscle memory. But when you're playing on the wing, it's completely different. In terms of knowing when to reach for that ball, being in more contests, I think he's going to struggle with that sometimes. And he's a fairly short player to begin with, even though he'd probably be going up against Brian To'o, who is also a short player. To'o has more experience in those kind of duels out wide. The second thing I mentioned was about expansive plays. Very simply, a lot of centres and a lot of wingers like to jam into the opposite centre or winger. And it's possible that Dylan Edwards will either sit back too much and allow things to open up, or he'll jam at the incorrect time and leave a huge gap behind him. Possibly. Now, that's not to say that Meninga and other teammates can't teach him how to play that position well enough defensively. I think in attack he'll be fine, just completely fine. But in defense, decision making may be a little bit off. So for me, that's why I say that's a weakness of the team. Now, he's partnered with Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, who has plenty of experience playing in centre, but he's still not a regular centre. He does mix around a little bit. So mostly at fullback, sometimes in the centre, sometimes on the wing. So I think the partnership there is something to be exploited. So if you start kicking the ball into the corner where Dylan Edwards is having to turn and chase balls into the in-goal area, he's making unfamiliar decisions. There could be a few mistakes in there that Samoa can exploit and capitalise on and get a few points out of. But if you chip that ball into the corner where Tabuai-Fidow is a little bit unfamiliar and Dylan Edwards and Tedesco, who's been a little bit off this season, you could create some problems for sure. Of course, the key plus for Australia is that they have a recognisable spine. It is very clear that on paper Australia is the much stronger team, and on spine they look excellent with Tedesco, Munster, Cherry-Evans and Ben Hunt. It's insanely strong. So not only do you have to deal with James Tedesco, who has had a much more improved second half of the season in the NRL, who at his best is a nightmare to deal with. He's great for picking up metres through the middle, and he is a nightmare to deal with when he's moving around the outside as well. You've then got to deal with Cameron Munster, who is incredible off the cuff. His decision making on instinct is highly impressive. Cherry Evans, whose kicking game is consistent week in, week out, and he will put Filogo in the fullback position under pressure constantly. Then you have Ben Hunt, who can also take on the kicking responsibilities if needed, if there's any changes to the spine. And from dummy half, can maybe go with a few quick kicks for a 40-20 attempt. This spine for Australia is ridiculous. Now, another positive for Australia, and of course there's many, but could you imagine being a professional rugby league player, coming up against Australia? Not only do you have to deal with the spine, deal with the quality that they've got on the bench, deal with their kicking game, but then when you do have the ball and you're trying to make things happen, you have to deal with Cameron Murray, Liam Martin, and Isaiah Yeo. Just imagine the pain. You're trying to spread the ball, you're trying to be creative, you're trying to make things happen, you're trying to do your own thing, and suddenly Liam Martin slams into you and you're on your backside. Those three are annoyingly impressive defensively. And the work rate they get through in 80 minutes is just unbelievable. How do they do it? Not only that on the defensive side, but in attack, they're really smart players. I've mentioned this before about Isaiah Yeo. There are 4 players on the Panthers that are very, very strong and impressive off the cuff. They are Jarome Luai, Nathan Cleary, Dylan Edwards, and Isaiah Yeo. Isaiah Yeo's ability to make things happen from nothing and to make quick, instinctive decisions is highly impressive and very underrated in the NRL. He just keeps doing it week in, week out. His decision-making in the middle and his ability to run with the ball are both annoyingly impressive. How do you deal with that on the defensive side and on the attacking side? How do you deal with it? It's one thing having to deal with players like that in stints. Like if there's a prop that's really annoyingly good, like Payne Haas, for example, he's going to have to go off at some point. But those three, in Murray, Martin and Yeo, they're staying on the field for 80 minutes. I mean, Yeo might come off for Patrick Carrigan for a bit, fair enough. But it's annoying enough having to deal with them for short stints. But the fact that they're probably not coming off for a while is just going to be an absolute joke. So the last few points that I'll make are, what can you do as an underdog? How can you take over a game that you're not favourites for, or you're likely to kind of be outplayed for a lot of it? I think there's only 3 things that you can do. Number 1, spot the weakness. The weakness, as I mentioned, is Dylan Edwards / Tabai Fidau. If you can keep aiming for that corner, put them under pressure, make them make decisions that they're not used to making on a regular basis, you could come up with something. Number 2 is very easy to say, but not necessarily easy to do, and that is be aggressive, but be smart. Now, what I mean by that is you've got to go at teams. The forward pack needs to go at the Australia forward pack, and I'm sure they will. I have no doubts that they'll put in a really strong shift, but you've got to be up for it. You've got to be properly up for it. And what I mean by being smart is, say for example, you pin Australia back inside their own 10. You want to be aggressive, you want to keep them back there so that when they kick, you start a fresh set from possibly inside their half. But the last thing you want is for someone to jump the gun just a little bit too early, or for someone to come in with a swinging arm, knocking someone in the skull, giving away a penalty, and you just lose all that good field position that you've worked for. Another thing with being smart is just not dropping the ball. Again, easier said than done, but one issue that Samoa had against England in their first game in the Rugby League World Cup last year was that they dropped the ball so much. They had so many errors. It cost them a lot. And say you've got the ball inside your own half, you knock on at about your own 40, Australia's going to get such good field position, and by the end of that set, you're going to be defending your own try line. So you've got to make sure that your handling is on point. You've got to be aggressive, you've got to be smart in defence, and you've got to be clinical with your passes with the ball. The third and final thing that I would say that underdogs need to do in order to overturn much stronger teams is they need to disrupt their attacking plays as much as possible. Again, easier said than done. One example of this is, a lot of the times we'll see this in the NRL, the play the ball is at the halfway line, for example, but the winger is 30 metres behind. But what they're doing is trying to create that depth. So there's only so much space that you can use up because the defensive line has to be 10 metres back. but by standing further back, you create your own depth, and that incentivizes the defensive line trying to jam up just a little bit too quickly, and that creates holes and disparities within that defensive structure. So let's say, for example, Ben Hunt is at the play the ball. He passes off to Isaiah Yeo. He then gives it off to Daly Cherry-Evans. Now, the likely thing that's about to happen here is that Kotoni Staggs and Selwyn Cobbo are a little bit further back. But James Tedesco is making that run around the back. So what they intend to do is create an overload. Now, what Daly Cherry-Evans will attempt to do is run at the line. He'll aim at one person and attempt to bring in a second player from the outside to come in to deal with the tackle. Now, the one player that Cherry-Evans is running at, what they need to do is go directly at Cherry-Evans first. So by doing that, they force an early pass to Tedesco, and that second player defensively that would have come in is now still part of that defensive line. They're no longer taken out of the play that Cherry-Evans is trying to take them out of. So they can still go 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 all across that line. So the ball still will probably get to James Tedesco from an early pass, but that's now a completely different landscape. That player that's been brought out defensively now is no longer looking at Cherry-Evans and is now one-on-one with James Tedesco. So even though the ball is probably going to get to James Tedesco anyway, it forces him to do things differently than he was expecting. You have all that depth still, but the last thing you want to do as well is, even though Selwyn Cobbo might still be another 10 metres back, the last thing you want to be doing as a winger is then jamming forwards, and that allows a little, maybe kick into the corner from James Tedesco. He doesn't do it too often, but we have seen it from time to time. It's a little kick towards the sideline because a winger has pushed forward or a centre has pushed forward. So you just need that early player jamming towards Cherry-Evans or Cameron Munster on the opposite side, forcing them to play early, and that landscape in attack is completely different. They're now having to deal with a completely different defence than they were hoping for. They were hoping to drag someone out the line, but now they're having to go one-on-one, and that forces players to make individual instinctive decisions. Now, of course, a lot of them for Australia are high-quality players that can do things off the cuff really quickly in one-on-one scenarios, and that's where somebody like Reece Walsh would have been an exceptionally brilliant option to go with at number one, or even Dylan Edwards, but James Tedesco can still do that. He's got it in his locker, of course, we know. But you force him to do something that he wasn't expecting to do. So you jam into Cherry-Evans as quickly as possible, force him to make the pass, and then the attacking landscape is completely different. So to actually head towards a prediction now, I'm going to give a specific scoreline. I do think there are points on offer for Samoa. I certainly think they can find ways to score, as mentioned with Dylan Edwards possibly being a little bit uncomfortable on the wing. But I'm going to go with Australia 30, Samoa 12. So that is going to be it for this video. Let me know in the comments down below what changes you would have made to this team. Also, let me know if you have any predictions yourself this week. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. And I will see you next time.